Yo, what's up guys, it's your boy Sami here. Today we are gonna see, what if, Naruto was emotionless, part 1. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start please subscribe to our channel, and like this video. So let's get into the video. And lo, the heavens opened, and he wept. His sorrowful crimson tears cleansing the world of those who did not deserve the gift of life. It hurt, it burrowed into his very soul, and brought more tears to the surface than even the oldest and most experienced shinobi, from Genin to Kage, had shed throughout time. The words cut deeper than any blade could ever dream of touching. The stares burrowed into him deeper than any drill. The whispers were like an assassin's blade, meant to hurt, but nearly silent, as they came. His existence hurts, why couldn't he just cease to be? He had seen parents love their children, praise them, and promise them things that would no doubt come true. When he was a child, where were these things when those around him got them so freely? He had nothing, no mother nor father to give him life and meaning. No brother or sister to give him advice and support. No family to give him love, all that was left to him was a name. His name hurts, why can't it be anything but Uzumaki Naruto? He had seen the strong be acknowledged for their strength or personality. He stood tall and proud, a full body mask covering head to toe, hiding his pain thoroughly. He orchestrated some of the most elaborate and amazing pranks known to them, but the most that got him were curses and calls of demon child. This was better than nothing, so he continued, hoping that maybe just once he would get something more than that. His heart hurts to beat, why couldn't he just die? He would have laughed at the irony if he could. After all the death threats and wishes from the populace to die, he just couldn't. He had taken a knife to chest and his throat, only to awake the next day with a scar and a whole lot of blood. He had done as many physical things to himself as they had done to his psyche, and yet he was still alive, in the physical sense that is. His life hurts. Why was it like lying on a bed of nails? So when the masked ninja burst into his room at night and stabbed him clean through the chest, all he could do was stare sadly and say, "I've done it 1,000 times before, it won't work." The ninja was prosecuted and forced to quit by the Hokage. He tried to reassure Naruto. He could only smile that goofy grin and say it was okay. It was a strange sort of revenge watching the ninja being led away with a ghostly white face and white eyes, claiming the child was immortal. His soul hurts, why was it tainted so? Tonight must have been the final night, it must have been under the villages near unanimous vote. He awoke to the smell of ash and smoke. Opening his eyes, he came to the realization that his world was indeed crashing down around him. Surrounding him were flames. They had devoured almost the entirety of his room, and were slowly crawling up along the sheets of his bed to his form. He smiled wryly. He hadn't tried this before, maybe it would work. He closed his eyes just as the flames touched the tips of his fingers, ready for them to burn too crisp. Suddenly it all vanished. The heat, the smell of the smoke, the sounds of the roaring inferno, it had disappeared completely. In its place was a cold chill, the smell of water, the dripping of a fluid-filled pipe, the complete opposite of what had been. He opened his eyes to find that he was sitting on the bottom of a gigantic crimson pipe. Water covered the ground all the way up to his waist. It took him a moment to realize the water was as cold as ice, so to remedy that he stood up, earning the slushing of the water, and an unexpected growl from farther down the corridor. Looking around, he figured, this must be death, not as cool as I thought. He began a trudging march down the hall, his mask long gone, as his face was locked in an emotionless stare. He was his true self, a child haunted and hunted by a village that hated the fact he was alive. A cold, emotionless little boy who didn't know what love was, but stopped himself from hatred. He only wanted to be known. It took him a while, a full half an hour, before he reached the end, and when he did he muttered, "I didn't think there'd be this much walking when you're dead." "You're dead, at least not yet," snarled a voice from nowhere. Looking up, he found that he had ended up before some gates a couple miles tall and about a mile wide, with hundreds upon hundreds of somewhat thin bars, and a paper declaring a seal over what looked like the lock. In a flash, a massive clawed paw slammed into the bars, rattling the room, but they had just missed stabbing Naruto clear through his spiky blonde-haired head. Naruto didn't budge, he didn't even blink, as he said, "You miss." He took one step forward, and pressed his forehead to the massive claw that was just before his nose, causing a large cut to open up on his forehead. Suddenly the claw pulled back before Naruto could do more, and from behind the bars 2 massive blood-red orbs appeared, staring at him with a mixture of disgust and anger. "You sicken me," growled at the creature, while the bloody-headed Naruto smoothly replied, "And you look like you were hit with the ugly tree when you were young, we share something in common." The creature growled, and threw his body at the bars, only to be thrown back with a blast of blue chakra. "If I could get out I would kill you. Afterwards I would thank you," Naruto said with a calm and even voice, without any hesitation whatsoever. The creature snarled at the brat's seeming arrogance and attitude. "You are weak, you can't even stand up to those who hate you. Why should I care what you say?" hissed Naruto angrily, finally showing some emotion from the cheap shot the demon took on him. Seeing the somewhat satisfied look on the monster's face, he produced his true self and commented, "Look at you, held behind bars thinner than I am. What are you anyway?" The creature produced a massive grin, and let loose some color intent attempting to scare the boy, but only succeeded in making him tap his foot in impatience. He had seen it all before, so why would he care? The great beast chuckled, and declared, "I am the great Kyuubi no Kitsune, greatest of all Byaiju, and before you ask we are inside your body. That's right, I am sealed within a pathetic excuse for a human by its even more pathetic father, because no pathetic human can beat me." He expected many things from the human, most of it being surprised at all of the new information. However, all he got from the now bloody-faced child was, "You like the word pathetic, don't you, you damn piece of demon shit. For all I care you can rot in me for all eternity, as I die, that'll solve a lot of problems, you dumb shit." Kyuubi stared wide-eyed at the foul-mouthed child with something other than hatred. It was pure confusion and surprise. Did he actually just call him that? No way in hell would the great beast stand for it. "Damn you, child," growled the beast, as its body radiated crimson chakra that slowly seeped from its cage to the seal, attempting to snap it, as it had so many others in its blind rage. Naruto stared at what the demon was doing, and quickly figured out what was happening. Even if he was doomed to die by whatever the demon was doing, at least it would be interesting to watch. He settled down cross-legged to watch the show, causing the beast to grow even angrier. It was a mess, the streets littered with shinobi, and civilians alike screaming words of hatred and anger toward the now burning home. Many of the ninja in the crowd decided to take it one step higher, and induce Kaiten along with some explosive notes, to give a show to the public. The slaying of the demon could be entertainment also. There was sake being spread from shop owners to those present. They heightened the already elated mood, not that it was needed, but it was there. The shout soon brought company, over all unwanted, but at the time they already couldn't be stopped. In a flash a powerful wave of color intent spread over the crowd. They turned to face a very furious Hokage. He hadn't even bothered to rid himself of his robes. He was staring down a couple hundred ninja and civilians in his pajamas with an angered look that could only come from a demon like the one that they were burning. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" howled the Hokage, but suddenly his own rage was suppressed under something much more powerful. Naruto watched as the Kyuubi's chakra went to work dismantling the seals swiftly, and with no tact at all, trusting the raw hate and power to protect him completely. "What do you think now, human?" snarled the Kyuubi with enough force to blow Naruto back just a bit, even though he didn't react, except for a small shift of his seating. "Quake in fear of my power." Naruto was silent for a few moments, then grinned a calm, and even grin. "Well, I would be scared if I didn't think you were going to die right now." Kyuubi's eyes shot open, and watched his crimson chakra, the long tendrils that were picking at the seal, suddenly froze completely. The effect quickly spread through all of his chakra, and eventually his form freezing him in place. Kyuubi's eyes stared in horror, as the crimson was slowly overcome with a pure white gleaming chakra that slithered up the tendrils, and to Kyuubi's form, overcoming it completely in its pale grasp. Before it was completely swallowed by the white energy, the Kyuubi gave a strangled scream of pain. "Well, this was fun," Naruto said, as he got to his feet. "Maybe I can finally G." Naruto found himself incapable of speaking, as a massive band of ghostly white chakra engulfed his head in its grasp, pulling him towards the cage. For once in his life he struggled against the most likely deadly force. From what he had heard from the Kyuubi, he didn't want to die like that. The ninjas stared in awe and horror, as the blaze they had begun grew 5 times the size all by itself, and took on a blood-red hue, becoming a beacon for nearly the entire ninja world with its raw energy. The Sandaime began to quake, feeling not only the chakra and power rising from the flames, but also the aura of utter hatred and death seeping from its crimson vapors. Suddenly a scream interrupted the stares, and all watched, as one of the crowd, a merchant who had refused Naruto's service on many occasions, and when he did give the starving boy service, he grossly overcharged him, pure and simple melted bone, and all. They all watched, as the crimson vapors of the flames landed upon his skin, and just like that his body began to melt with great pain, if the scream was any indication. That was all it took for the mob to run like the cowards they were. All that left was the old Hokage, as he watched the flames and crimson vapors grow larger and thicker. He was frozen by so many conflicting emotions. All he could do was stare in horror, as the crimson mist flowed closer to him, wrapping around him with a good foot radius, isolating him without any way to escape. However, as he watched the bloody mist close in on him, he chuckled cynically. 2 Hokages down by 1 demon. It was almost poetic. Then again, he was getting on in years, and seeing what the village had done to that poor boy. He guessed there was no more use for a man with a heart in Konoha anymore, seeing as everyone else had either torn theirs out or sold it. Slowly the mist wrapped around Sarutobi's form, but where it had melted the merchant, it merely passed along his flesh, caressing his old and brittle bones with a power much more mysterious. He winced in surprise, as he felt a warm wind pass through his body, the crimson mist passing through his flesh and blood, as if he were non-corporeal. He felt a tingling sensation in his palm, and he held up a hand to his face, as he watched his wrinkled old flesh begin to expand and become more elastic, taking a much more youthful appearance than what it had been. His eyes widened, as he felt his hair grow longer. Bangs covered his eyes, gradually changing from gray at the tips to a deep rich brown closer to his head. He felt his joints loose, his muscles grow, his energy triple had he grown young. He heard a chuckle in his mind. It was low and deep, but with a touch of a tone he knew all too well, considering this a once-in-a-lifetime gift. Aji-san. You're the only one who deserves anything like it. He looked all around for the source of the voice, but found none. Come on Aji-san, called the voice. My home is open to you, I only want a few words. Sarutobi took a shaky step into the mist, but only felt that warm breeze caress him, so he continued on, going through the crimson flames, as if they were mere updrafts of warm air. Sarutobi entered the heart of the blaze, seeing the demolished building. However, sitting in the very center was a bundle of blood red and pitch black. The Hokage took very careful steps over the demolished parts of the building, finding it much easier with his younger form, and found the crimson and black mass was a living, breathing fox. The fox was a good 5 feet long even without the 4 tails, and while it was at the moment lying down, it had to stand about 3 feet tall or more. Its body was covered in blotches and stripes of crimson and raven black, coming to end at 4 black and red tails that waved casually behind him. In all, it looked to be a good 10 feet long from its nose to the tips of its tails. The fox suddenly turned his head to the sandame, revealing its face and its eyes, one a haunting crimson, while the other was like looking into a dark well. There was no white at all, just a pitch black orb where cerulean blue eyes should have been. Above both eyes was a small mark of white going across his head like a hit eye aiding his very body. Hey Aji-san, the fox spoke with that gruff voice that had invaded his mind only a few moments ago. So how do I look? Sarutobi's mouth opened in shock. Naruto, oh dear gods, is it you? The fox chuckled and began to shift, pulling its body from the ground to a standing position, revealing it was about 4 feet tall. Yes, it is Aji-san. Kyuubi tried to escape, but Kyuubi. Sarutobi shouted in surprise at the development of the fox, now named Naruto. Please don't do that Aji-san, Naruto said, rubbing the side of his face with his paw. That really hurt my ears. I am sorry Naruto, Sarutobi said with a worried look on his face. Naruto smiled the way only a fox can and spoke. It fell to the sea, Aji-san. Its body is now mine along with most of its memories, and enough power to make me a four-tail. It was too angry at me to take the time to work the seal off gradually, and it backfired. I don't know what to say to Naruto, Sandame spoke over the flames, joy flooding his tone, as tears spilled from his eyes. I have plenty to still say, Naruto said, turning his head from Sarutobi to his flames, the roaring inferno being reflected in his crimson eyes. I'm going to be leaving, Naruto said, and before Sarutobi could speak he held up a tail to stop him. They hated me for the beast, so what will they do when I really am one? The Kyuubi was gone, but Sarutobi was suddenly hit with the burden Naruto now truly carried. It was so much heavier than his last. Naruto chuckled sardonically. Even though I'm powerful enough to crush any of them, they'd still see me as nothing. Naruto turned to Sarutobi with knowledgeable eyes of one who has seen true pain either through his own or the experiences of another. That is why I gave you the gift, Aji-san. Your youth is yours for another couple decades. You're the only person I felt was ever close. You really are my family. Naruto grinned. I know my father sealed that monster in me, so can you fill in the gaps? Sarutobi was shocked, but got over it swiftly. After what had happened recently, he was used to these shocking turns. Your mother died from the combination of childbirth, stress, and an illness that could only be conceived in her family's blood. Naruto nodded slowly. That answers so much. Thank you, Hokage-sama. Sarutobi chuckled. It's Aji-san. Naruto, good luck. Naruto bowed his head. Thank you, Aji-san. Be sure to take care of this village. I will be back to see how good of a job you did. Oh, and let them think I died. It'll be fun to see them react. Naruto turned to the wall of flames that he had determined was his exit. In the blink of an eye he burst through the wall of flames, creating a massive explosion, coupled with an earth-shaking shockwave that nearly knocked the Hokage down. Godspeed Naruto, Sarutobi muttered, finally feeling the effects of his reversed aging on his body, but I doubt you'll need it. Kyuubi, said the Hokage known worldwide as the professor for his knowledge of all Konoha, has been defeated. The chorus of cries and shouts rang throughout the village. Those who were not in on the secret only looked around in confusion. In other words, the children watched the confusing behavior of their parents. However, said the Hokage, the boy known as Uzumaki Naruto is now dead. He was on the receiving end of many looks and obvious stuff from the adults, while the children were confused or just didn't care what Naruto had to do with it. The most they knew about him was that he was a kid just starting the academy, and he was damn annoying. This was the mentality shared by almost all except a young raven-haired boy and a wide-eyed little girl. Sarutobi hung his head, seeing, as the young child passed, I felt compelled to lift the law, holding back all of the truth. Gasps were heard all around, and the Hokage spoke up. Uzumaki Naruto was one of the greatest heroes of Konoha. He alone was the reason why Kyuubi no Kitsune was defeated. The child was the demon himself. Came a shout from the back of the group, splitting it in two, revealing the two biggest clan heads, Uchiha Fugako and Hyuga Hiashi side by side. The Hokage trembled, his now younger body giving off waves of power. He had yet to reveal his form. He had placed a thick many-layered genjutsu upon his form that was even beyond the Sharingan's piercing eye. How can you say that? The Hokage hissed angrily, but Fugako and Hiashi continued with twin shouts of, the beast was the boy biding his time to kill us all. We should rejoice both of their passings. Suddenly they were both face to face with a very angry Hokage. You best hold your tongue before I cut it off. Uzumaki Naruto was a hero, said the Hokage, his voice rising in volume. It was through his willpower and manipulation of the fox's rage that allowed him to kill the fox within his own body, at the expense of his own life. He, along with his father the Yondaime mind you, are the greatest heroes this village has ever known. This sent a shockwave through those gathered. The information they received was far too much to process all at once. A certain dark-haired little boy smirked. He knew there was something else to the blonde idiot than what was on the surface. He even noticed that there was just too much depth to be ignored, but he was now gone, and that made his smirk be replaced with a frown. Too bad. The young white-eyed girl's eyes sparkled, hearing the power the Hokage claimed the young boy had held. He was powerful, enough that her father had to recognize him as something other than an annoyance. Just as quickly her attitude fell. He had died in his quest to save the village just as his father had. No matter how powerful the family, being dead was dead. No one noticed her pale violet eye dull just a bit. From this day on I shall recognize Uzumaki Naruto as a true hero, the Hokage said, turning away from the stunned Uchiha and Hyuga leader. Giving everything to protect this village is what every leaf shinobi, especially the Hokage, does on a daily basis. I want to thank him for putting up with the hatred he faced in this village. The Hokage's tone took on something much darker. I hope that by the end of tonight, you will all realize that Naruto could have released the beast. By letting his guard drop, and giving up all hope, he could have let the monster back in this world, and nothing could have stopped it. Ignoring the shock exuded by the crowd, he turned, and began to walk, leaving the crowd to their own devices with his final words. I hope you realize that the one you should hate is the Kyuubi for killing the two greatest heroes this village has ever known. He took one look at the village, a small glance over his shoulder, before turning around with a grin so wide it could have swallowed the moon. He now had real power, thousands of years of knowledge that no human ever knew, wells of energy so deep he could barely see the bottom, an instructor in the form of a small five-tailed fox that held the last few eons of knowledge within his tiny figurative skull. He was strong now, stronger than the most seasoned Chunin and several Jounin. All he needed was time, and maybe an accomplice. As time rolled on, it saw many changes flow through the village. The academy grew dimmer, no annoying laugh or outrageous prank had been or ever would be pulled again. On the wall of the homeroom of one Yumino Ruka, there was a small plaque with the picture of a smiling blonde-haired young boy. Below the picture of the Cheshire child it read, in memory of Uzumaki Naruto, son of the Yondaime, may he rest in peace. In death he had gained more respect than he had ever commanded in life. Many of those who once saw him as a monster, now saw him as the young boy who had toppled the giant, completing his father's work. They would bow their heads at the small ceremony held for the boy, and every year following, when the anniversary of the boy's death would come around, there were those saying the monster still lived, laying low under the guise of death, but years later they recognized their mistake and begged forgiveness. There were no more secrets to be held in the village. Everyone knew the boy's parents and what had been his condition. His father's enemies felt satisfaction when they heard his son had died without ever giving birth to an heir, so they ceased whatever vendetta they held. A victory was a victory no matter what the conditions. The village regretted their past actions, but there was no true way to apologize. They could only stew in their guilt, as they felt a certain loss in their daily life. Iruka's class was dull. A few times soon after the child's death, when a student was sleeping, he would accidentally call them Naruto, only to catch himself and hold back his tears. There were not only tears of sorrow, but regret. He too had treated the boy as the terrible monster, and not as the lonely student he also was at one point. That fact made him sick to his stomach with disgust directed solely upon himself. When the day came to allow the children to graduate, he called them in one by one, letting those who passed walk through the door with a brand new Konoha headband. There were no failures. Takashi had become later than normal, using his excuses to cover up for his visiting of 3 graves, instead of just one. During each visit he would sigh, and apologize to the 2 additional graves, telling them that he would never let something like this happen ever again. As long as he drew breath no child would suffer, as Naruto had, as the son of the Yondaime had. He would be 4 hours late instead of 2, but in his mind did it really matter? Each and every Jounin of this new group of genin watched their students grow exponentially during their first year, and soon allowed them to enter the Chunin exams. This turned out to be a mistake of one of the highest calibers. While all 9 of the rookie teams passed the Forest of Death, they knew something was wrong with Uchiha Sasuke. Uchiha Itachi destroyed his entire clan, fleeing the village to join the Akatsuki, under the guise of testing his limits. Uchiha Sasuke was forever traumatized, obsessed with the death of his brother. More than anything he trained, but none were up to his desired level. No matter the skill, he eventually found a way to humiliate them, and it began to sicken him. He wanted a challenge, a rival, a true test of his own power. He found that in the face of a grass genin, a clever ruse created by one Orochimaru to claim the boy's eyes for his own. Afterwards all Sasuke could think about was the power the man named Orochimaru possessed, and the power he had granted him with the curse seal placed upon his neck. During the preliminary tournament the Hyugas fought, Neji easily trouncing the silent heir to the point that she was near death. She had no courage, no motivation, and no confidence. The only reassurance she received were the half-hearted cheers from her teammates. Misguiding superficial support, they knew she couldn't win no matter how much luck she had, or what miracles visited her. This was something she knew long before the fight began. Her already dim eyes grew even duller, and she fell into the role of a puppet, an emotionless machine that obeyed without question whatever training regimen or goal her father placed before her. She became stronger, and in essence more ruthless, able to surpass her younger sister, and quickly gained ground on her cousin in the short month after the preliminary fights. Despite this newfound strength she had no soul of her own. Her dull white eyes spoke of the sadness of her heart, while her lips never moved except to eat and breathe. The black rings around her pale eyes expressed the fact she rarely slept. The training her father and the council gave her was too rigorous for sleep. No matter what her mental condition, her father and the council approved. If she couldn't be a good leader then at least she would make an excellent marionette. Neji still despised the main house. He hated Hinata, and how she allowed them to use her as their puppet, but no amount of hateful glares or words solved the thing. All she would do would look back at him with that irritating sorrow-filled gaze, never speaking a single word. He would then challenge her to a match, something she would accept with a brief nod of her head. Each time he would win, but he found it harder and harder to do each day. Sakura became more violent than ever before. She had no outlet for her rage, whether it be jokingly or seriously. This fed-up rage was bound to explode at one point, so when the match against her once best friend began she didn't waste time, and carried it out with sickening precision and anger. Ino never saw it coming. It was doubtful if she would ever see it correctly again. Kiba became too arrogant for his own good, falling victim to an attack that placed both him and Akamaru in the hospital for an undetermined amount of time. He lay on his hospital bed praying that Akamaru would live. He had taken the brunt of the strong blow for his foolish master. Kiba regretted it all, and began to cry, praying for anything to save his canine friend. He received news the next day that Akamaru would recover, but they were uncertain if he would ever be the same. When the attack on Konoha began many were so surprised they were left wide open when the Sun soldiers attacked their homes and civilians. The Kazekage did have some powerful children, a Kunoichi who had control over the wind with her massive fan, while her brother commanded puppets that could have rivaled the infamous Akasuna, no Sasorian skull. Many knew the Kazekage had one last son, but he had been missing for many years. Orochimaru ambushed the Hokage, feeling absolutely certain he would easily destroy the souled shell of the man he once called master. The Hokage smirked at his student's arrogance and stupidity. He may have found a solution to death, but he was never too close with Genjutsu. Dispelling his complex and powerful illusion he saw Orochimaru's already pale face blank. He felt it was time to fully punish his student for his transgressions against humanity. The Hokage walked away from the battle with deep cuts and such covering his body, along with numerous broken bones, but Orochimaru crawled away without a right arm and leg. He was lucky enough to escape Sarutobi's renewed strength and skill with a distraction concocted by his personal bodyguards. The Hokage quickly healed what he could, and placed his Genjutsu on, as one would don a raincoat. It was time to aid the village, as only the god of shinobi could. The sound and sand forces were repelled. It was quite easy when you had so many competent shinobi in one village, and you finally gained your bearings after one large cheap shot. However, that didn't mean all was well. Many had died in the invasion, severely cutting down Konoha's resources and shinobi. Soon aid was gathered to aid in the village's reconstruction and training of the next generation. It took Jiraiya, Sarutobi, and many other high-ranking ninja to physically drag her back, then convince her to stay. It didn't take that many words to convince Uchiha Sasuke of their cause. The curse seal was working on him just like any good puppet master would their prize puppet. However, while they were leading, then eventually carrying Sasuke from Konoha to the border, there and into some trouble they expected, and some they didn't. They did expect to be followed, but after the Jounin were tailed by Genin, they felt just a bit insulted. Jirabu was the first to stay behind, using his dome of earth to feed off the chakra of their opponents. Kidomaru was the next to fight. Apparently Jirabu was too weak, and he needed to fight. He let the other two go, and faced the group, taunting them with his skill and intelligence. In a moment of arrogance he accidentally allowed the others to pass by while facing the white-eyed Hyuga. He grinned maniacally to himself, as he activated his curse seal to his second level. This was as good as over. Seiken and Tei were next, battling the bug user and the genius respectively. Seiken and Yukin found fighting the bug user was much more difficult than they thought. Since his bugs could devour chakra, and they knew the difference between the master's chakra and an invading source, they couldn't destroy his body from the inside out. That left only pure force and power at their disposal, something that at their second level curse seal they had in spades. Tei saw Kamimuro take the barrel from the genius and the spandex-wearing freak easily, claiming he was the closest to Orochimaru's dream seeing, as he was moving on pure willpower alone. He pet the barrel caringly, and said that the container held an even more important part of that vision. Like that he was off with the green freak following, leaving Taya to battle the genius, something she was sure that her spirit demons would have no problem with. They watched the battle rage on between the green freak and the bone user. The bone user was strong, but so was the green freak. When he let his weights go, they watched the bone freak be bounced around, as though he was a toy. The speed that the green being possessed was outclassing the white-haired bone user easily. Suddenly they saw the bone freak's shirt full, and he revealed a curse seal. It spread over his body, and soon he was moving at the speed of the green beast, matching him blow for blow with his own dances, as you like to call them. The green freak was being worn out, his body being pushed to the limit to battle this beast. Without warning, the barrel that the bone user had held began to smoke, emitting a thick purple mist that unnerved the green one, and made the bone user slurp. Seconds later the container exploded in a shower of wood and paper, offering to the world a Sasuke transformed by his own level 2 curse seal, burning away his chakra and free will. The Uchiha smirked and clenched his fist, feeling the raw power flow through him before he turned and became a blur of speed. Suddenly the taller of the two chuckled and said, "Would you be so kind as to help the green guy? I think he's about to die. I'll go fetch the runner." The second nodded. "As you wish, Nobu-sama." "Oh please," the being laughed lightly, "you know by now to call me Nobu-san." With that they both vanished, one in a raven black blur, while the other was clouded in a whirlwind of sand. Lee was kneeling on the ground, panting and wincing, as with every pulse of his blood rose a new pain into his already battered and crushed form. He stared in awe and anger as the bone freak easily stood up. He looked as though he wasn't in any pain whatsoever, as he took a few steps toward Lee. He held up his fingers and said in that calm voice, "Teshi Senden." From his fingers came his distal phalange bones, flying and spinning towards Lee's head. He sighed and thought, "This is it. I have to use that move." He concentrated, feeling deep within himself for the doors that would release his body's stores of chakra. Before he could open those massive gates, an immense wall of something flew in front of him and intercepted the bullets, stopping them in their tracks, despite their added drilling attribute. Lee's head spun around, and he viewed something he would never forget. Standing behind him with crossed arms was a shinobi youth, no older than himself, he was guessing. The boy was wearing a wide-brimmed hat that covered his head in a shadow light enough to be seen through. His eyes were light emerald, while his shoulder-length hair was the color of freshly spilled blood, and just above his left eye was a tattoo of the word love. He was garbed in a long-sleeved floor-length deep crimson coat, giving off a dark and vaguely sinister look about him. Wrapped around his waist and over his shoulder were a pair of tanned leather sashes. They held a massive baize gourd onto his back. Under the coat he wore normal ninja armor, but what was unique was the long string with metal tags he wore around his neck. The seals imprinted in the metal were the most complex Lee had ever seen in his life. It was the same condition with his gourd, however there was only one enormous complex seal on the top bulge, and it was quite a bit different than the others. The ninja wore long black pants and high-topped black sandals that concealed his legs entirely. On the strap of his gourd was a hit I-8 that portrayed a fox's head with a small mark on its brow. "Who are you?" Lee asked with wide eyes, staring at this being that simply radiated a chakra so dark and ominous that it made his stomach turn. "I am known as Sabaku no Gar," Gar said, as his sand wall lifted, revealing the level 2 seal Kamimuro in all his quiet rage. "And if you value your life, you will allow me to kill this man. I have been given orders, and I intend to follow them." Sasuke grinned wickedly, his madness growing by leaps, and bound with each moment the second-level curse seal was in effect. He finally had the power he wanted. He finally had what he needed to defeat that monster of a brother. He finally had a village of fighters strong enough to give him a challenge. He finally had a true master that would make him grow. He winced in pain, and came to a stop, feeling the seal on his neck burn. He looked at his hand, and saw the darkness of his skin fade, and the black flames returned only to begin shrinking. The seal had returned to low level 1. Sasuke thought for a moment, then shrugged. He supposed it wasn't anything too major. He could always return to that second-level state, since he already knew the path. After all, would he truly need to walk around flaunting that power constantly? Well, yes, but he could figure that out when he came to it. With those thoughts he continued at a somewhat slower, but overall fast pace toward the border. When he reached what was known worldwide as the Valley of the End, he saw something that he did not expect. Seated a few feet from the edge of the chasm was a figure. His entire body was shrouded in mystery, and his head was covered with a large wide-brimmed kasa that had white papers covering the rest of his face and hair. Sasuke snorted at the beginning. He didn't know what his game was, but he didn't really care. He was strong enough that if the being decided to be stupid and try to stop him, he could easily overpower him. Feeling Belsi at the moment had walked right out of the woods, intent on passing by the figure without even acknowledging his existence, as is the arrogance of madness, and the madness of arrogance. He seemed to march past the being, not even getting nor giving a word to the seated figure, who seemed to stare out into the nothingness through the paper of the kasa. Sasuke scoffed and examined his route, deciding that the chasm was the quickest path to his power. He was about to leap down, until he heard a voice, low and gruff, but with a vaguely friendly edge to it. "So a curse seal, ha? Pity, I was thinking you were strong for a minute, but you're just a weakling avenger." Sasuke grit his teeth and forced the seal to spread farther, getting closer to the second level. As he turned to face the cloaked person, "Who the hell do you think you are?" The being signed and said, "I've got a lot of names, but you can call me Nobu-sama." Sasuke growled and formed a few hand seals, creating the Chidori in his left palm. As he said, "I call no one Sama. The only one who deserves respect is me." Sasuke vanished in a blur, his Sharingan eyes blazing with, but only two, as he charged the seated being with amazing speed. The man known as Nobu sighed, as he rolled his neck, allowing a few cracks to pierce whatever air was not being taken up by the chirping of 1,000 birds. Superiority complexes up the ass. Sasuke reared back his left hand, and with all of his strength thrust the Chidori towards the heart of the seated man. When the explosion cleared, there was a massive crater in the ground. Seated next to it was Nobu with his hand holding Sasuke's wrist, and thus hand to the edge of the crater. Sasuke gritted his teeth and saw Nobu's hand on his wrist, a tan-skinned hand with claw-like fingernails. "I like the spunk," Nobu said, as he slowly stood, revealing his height to be a few inches taller than Sasuke, "but the attitude has to go." Sasuke growled and pushed his chakra higher, forcing his body to morph into the hideous form of level 2 activation. Sasuke violently pulled his hand away and leapt back, forcing two hand-like wings to sprout from his back. He began to hover. Instead of turning and fleeing for the land of sound, his anger won out, and just as he had before, he began to form a Chidori in his palm. "I'll kill you, bastard," growled Sasuke, as in his palm formed a darker and even more powerful assassination weapon, roaring with the sound of 1,000 birds. Over the sounds of birds, over the beat of his wings, over the sound of his blood rushing through his ears, he heard Nobu whisper, "He left a lot to be desired." Sasuke growled in fury and sped forward, his hand-like wings beating furiously, attempting to gain speed in the vicious freefall. Nobu smirked behind his kasa and held out his hand, allowing Sasuke to watch with his activated Sharingan, as wisps of crimson and midnight black chakra were emitted from his opponent's open palm. Sasuke stared in rage and disturbed amazement as the mist-like chakra gathered into a sphere in Nobu's hand, creating a ball of pure black, with only faint stripes of red here and there. "Kujiki Tama." Sasuke growled and forged ahead, plunging the Chidori into battle with the pitch-black ball, but no matter how hard he pushed, the ball didn't move, not in the least. Nobu chuckled low in his throat. "Do you even know what a void does? It sucks up everything, and anything close to it. Now who's touching it?" Sasuke's eyes opened wide, and he saw what Nobu was talking about. The darkness Chidori, his most powerful, that had once flowed around his arm, was now reduced to a small glow that his hand held. In the blink of an eye, even that vanished, leaving him with his palm resting on the inky black ball. Seeing his greatest offense being dispelled so easily, he attempted to flee, but found his hand was stuck. He couldn't pull it back even the slightest distance from the dark orb. He hissed in pain as the color of his skin drained, and his body shifted forms against his will, the darkness of his level 2 fleeing his form and being absorbed by the dark ball. The black flames that now covered his body succumbed to the same fate, being pulled into the void sphere with excruciating pain, earning a loud piercing scream from the throat of Sasuke. At last Sasuke was back to his normal form, but he was still screaming in agonizing pain as the curse seal moved from his neck to his arm, and eventually his palm. A sickening crack was heard as the mark reached his palm, breaking from his skin and being pulled into the black ball he gripped in his open hand. When it was all over, he was just barely standing, his limp hand sliding off the orb, seeing as it had gotten what it wanted. It wasn't long before he collapsed, having nearly all of his chakra pulled from him, along with having the curse seal torn from his body, and soul was too much for him to handle. Nobu chuckled and looked at his ball of pitch black, feeling the information of the heaven curse seal, and the young ninja he just defeated flowed directly into his mind, before the orb dispersed in a mist of black vapor. "Uchiha Sasuke," Nobu said, turning to face the fallen boy, "this will be very interesting." Nobu bent down and hoisted the boy up onto his shoulder, turning from the sound to Konoha with a slow and even walking pace. Sasuke made no movements other than soft breathing and occasional twitching. Nobu began to hum a little tune to pass the time. Gaara stood above the field of bone spikes, with Lee kneeling next to him. Before the pair was Kamimura ready to strike, but his body had just given out on him, the exact moment he was to deliver the killing blow to Gaara. He now stood as a statue, his face holding not the look of a killer, but of something far more tortured. Lee stared in fear at the beast that Kamimura had become, but he questioned Gaara's sanity as he got closer to the body, looking into the eyes of the dead titan before clasping his hands in prayer and bowing his head. "Rest in peace, Kamimura-san." Gaara reached out with one hand and slid it over Kamimura's eyes, closing them for good. Lee looked up to Gaara in confusion while Gaara merely said, "Him and I are similar." He fought for someone who saved him from loneliness, but his attachment was misguided, as was the man he chose to follow. "I wish him only peace in the afterlife. Still, it would be far better for him to rot in the bowels of hell than to live the life he had under the man he fought for." "Gaara-san," called a voice from the edge of the bone field. Both heads turned to see the cloak being holding Sasuke laughing loudly, and said, spouting off another one of your sermons. "Can't I leave you alone for 5 minutes without you going off about that?" Gaara frowned, but before he could argue back, Lee shouted in surprise, while pointing at the body draped over Nobu's shoulder, "It's Sasuke. How did you get him?" The being looked at Lee then chuckled, introducing first Midori Urasen. "May I ask what your name is?" Lee was shaking, but said Rock Lee. The being smiled and said, "Well, Rock Lee, I'm guessing you came from Konoha, correct?" Lee nodded slowly. "We received a 5-man mission to retrieve Uchiha Sasuke, and I made a personal promise to bring him back." The being nodded. "Well, if Gaara-san would be so kind as to get me on one of his flying dirt clots, then we can be back in no time at all, right, Gaara-san?" Gaara rolled his eyes and said, "As you wish, Shinobu-sama." The being groaned, as a thin layer of sand lifted him off the ground until it became thick enough to easily stand upon. "It's Nobu-san, Gaara-san." Gaara chuckled, and they were off, flying across the land at an alarming pace for flying chunks of crushed rock. Lee was severely confused at this turn of events, but thankfully exhaustion hit, and he passed out upon the flying bed of sand he shared with Gaara. The procession into Konoha was an odd one to say the least. Even though there were not that many ninja waiting the arrival of the rescue team, those who were incredibly worried. Sakura was at the head of the group, her hands clasped in prayer for Sasuke, and for Lee, who had made the promise of a lifetime to retrieve the Uchiha. Behind her was Kiba, holding on to Akamaru, who was still nursing his injuries, but was as curious as his master was about what had befallen their friend Shino. Standing beside him was Hyuga Hinata, her dull black ringed Byakugan staring out into the world beyond the gates, in an attempt to catch some glimpse of the team. She had come here on request by Kiba. He hoped that her Byakugan would be enough to spot hospital-level trouble if it was coming. Standing at the gates, but far away from Sakura, was Ino, praying for her teammates' return, but warily eyeing Sakura every few moments. Her right eye was bandaged while her left still had a bright shine around it. Tenten was beside Ino, wishing the same thing for her teammates, Nichi and Lee, better pull through, or when they were reincarnated, she would kill them. Suddenly Hinata shifted, which Kiba caught in his peripheral vision. He turned to her with a questioning glance. "Is it them or is it trouble?" With a simple hand gesture, Kiba grinned wide and said, "Hey guys. Hinata says they're back." Those who had been in a somewhat relaxed position jumped up and prepared to receive the heroes. First through the gate was something very unexpected. First came a small round orb that resembled a floating eyeball, and behind it, resting on a bed of what looked to be flying sand, was Niji and Chaoji. Chaoji looked deathly thin, and Niji looked like he had been used as a pincushion for kunai and arrows. Limping in behind the severely injured were Shikamaru and Shino. Shino was leaning on Shikamaru, using him as a crutch as he walked slowly and with a prominent limp. The next one through the gates was a boy, later known as Gar, carrying Lee over his shoulder, since his gourd was still on his back. One of his eyes was closed, but suddenly the ball of sand collapsed, and he opened his remaining emerald orb to the world. Lastly was the cloak and Kasa-covered being, eventually called Nobu, with Sasuke on his back sleeping peacefully. Lee was beaten and battered, but he looked much better than either Niji or Chaoji, those two being taken by their teammates to the hospital immediately after being received. After the two teams had left, Shino was pulled away by Kiba, leaving Hinata to give Nobu a dull white-eyed stare, before following her teammates silently. In the action, Tenten had grabbed Lee, but Ino had forgotten Shikamaru, leaving him with the secondary heroes Nobu and Gar, and the fangirl Sakura. And all only Gar, Shikamaru, Nobu, Sasuke, and Sakura remained. Nobu chuckled and pulled the sleeping Sasuke from his back, holding him out to Sakura with an odd voice. "I think this belongs to you. Lee-san went through a lot, but I can say he kept his promise." Sakura accepted the Uchiha heir, looking him over, only to find that he just had severe chakra exhaustion, along with some minor bruises. She turned her head up and looked at Nobu, who smirked behind his kasa, and said, "You might want to get him to the hospital with the others. Total chakra exhaustion can be deadly." Sakura nodded and turned on her heel, racing off with Sasuke in her arms, leaving only Gar, Shikamaru, and Nobu there. Shikamaru glanced between the two and decided to speak up. "I don't really care, but who are you, and why did you help?" Nobu looked at Gar, who nodded and said, "I am Sabaku no Gar." Nobu turned to Shikamaru and spoke, "And I'm called Nobu, and before I answer your other question, mind taking us to the Hokage?" Shikamaru stared at the two for a moment, then nodded. "Come with me, I can put off healing a broken finger for now." How troublesome. He had been engrossed in his paperwork ever since he learned about Uchiha Sasuke's apparent defection from Konoha to the Sound. The constant meaningless tasks were the only things that could take his mind off the events that had been happening. Apparently Orochimaru placed one of his curse seals on the boy, and now due to the dark influence the seal had on his mind and soul, he had gone to Orochimaru for power. To make matters worse, due to the invasion that Orochimaru had orchestrated, they had a shortage of ninja. Taking that into account with the property damage and the many other problems that had been surfacing in Konoha, he was getting severely overworked. Even if he did have a younger body than his genjutsu showed, it was very taxing on him and his energy. He was not in the mood to be ticked off right now, but apparently the fates were against him in even that respect. Like an explosion, his doors were slammed open, revealing a cloaked figure with a wide-brimmed kasa. His arms were out, showing he was the one that had opened the door. Behind him stood a young man, which you would later learn was Sabaku no Gar, rolling his eyes at the cloak being foolishness. Lastly, there was a familiar face, Narushikamaru, his face betraying his bored outlook on life, as it was freely showing his shock at the cloak being's behavior. The cloaked man walked up to his desk, as casually, as if he had been in charge, and said, "What's up Hokage-sama, hear you're doing a bang-up job here." The Hokage grit his teeth, and said in a forced calm tone, "Whoever you are, get out now." The cloaked figure only laughed, and said, "Aji-san, you should really watch who you're talking to." The Hokage was close, ready to jump up, and destroy the cloaked figure. That was until he grabbed his hat, and pulled it from his head. Sarutobi nearly had a heart attack. Thanks for watching my video, leave a like if you enjoyed my video, and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. See you next time, till then sayonara.